The Dreamcast, everyone's favourite Sega console. Well, not ours, you all know where our heart lies, but when the Dreamcast was discontinued in 2001, it's undeniable that many games were still in development. In fact, we know they were. Sonic Adventure 2, Rez and Shenmue 2 all launched well after Sega sadly pulled the plug on their hardware business. That said, anyone who's been around console gaming for long enough knows that the very best games don't arrive until year 3 and beyond. And I mean that in terms of performance and visual quality, not just gameplay. I mean, just look at the original PlayStation. The likes of Tekken 3, Metal Gear Solid and Gran Turismo were light years ahead of the games released in the first 3 years of the console's life. As development tools mature and developers learn the hardware, they know where and how to nip and tuck performance throughout the system to get gains where necessary, pushing the hardware harder and further than ever before. Just look at Grand Theft Auto 3 on the Dreamcast for example. It feels like every month Falco Gurgis is posting on X about finding new gains to make the Dreamcast port even better. So if homebrew developers are able to do this with Callisti OS, there's no reason to believe that seasoned game developers with official dev kits and libraries couldn't either. The Dreamcast was only on the market for 856 days from November 27, 1998 to March 31st, 2001. That's less than 2.5 years, a good 7 months shy of the magical 3-year mark that I just mentioned. So in this video, I'm going to show you the games that I believe we were denied as Dreamcast owners. Games that were cruelly taken from us. Games I believe, in my heart of hearts, the Dreamcast could have easily handled as developers got the best out of the hardware. This is the Dreamcast games that never were. We start this list with probably the most painful loss, Virtua Fighter 4. The debut title for the Naomi 2 arcade board, many a Sega fan and Dreamcast owner thought this was a shoo-in for release on Dreamcast. Down the years, many have claimed that Dreamcast couldn't have handled VF4, citing the additional power of the Naomi 2 and how it would have been a step too far for our favourite little white box. Now, of course the Naomi 2 was an absolute monster of an arcade board. While Naomi 1 and 2 share most of the same architecture, everything is pretty much doubled. That said, they're both so alike that Naomi 2 can run Naomi 1 games, given both use the same cartridge and GD-ROM formats. When Sega ported the game to the PlayStation 2, sacrifices were made. Now let's caveat what comes next by saying that I love the PS2 version. I think it's a great port, but the downgrade is undeniable. Less detailed textures, simplified backgrounds with a mix of 2D and 3D elements, and decreased lighting effects. I can already hear the question, if the PS2 had to make cutbacks, then the Dreamcast wouldn't have stood a chance. But here's my argument. PS2 isn't in the same hardware family as Dreamcast. Naomi 2 is essentially a Naomi 1 running at twice the speed. Naomi 1 and Dreamcast are extremely similar, albeit Naomi has more RAM and VRAM. However, you'd be pressed to spot the difference between the Dreamcast and arcade versions of Naomi games. I mean, Crazy Taxi on Dreamcast is so faithful to the Naomi version, it even slows down in the same places. And that's my point. The Dreamcast could have handled VF4. There would have been cutbacks, just like on PS2, but thanks to being part of the same family of hardware, the scale down to Dreamcast would have resulted in a more than acceptable port. Even more so, given the Power VR2's texture compression features. And I mean, it wouldn't have been the first time Sega had done it. Just look at Virtua Fighter 2 on the Saturn. We absolutely should have seen VF4 on Dreamcast, and given it released in arcades in August 2001 and came to PS2 in January 2002, I still to this day have a hunch it was in development for Dreamcast prior to the discontinuation. In fact, In May 2001's issue of the official UK Dreamcast magazine, it's reported that Yu Suzuki told Famitsu that a Dreamcast conversion would depend on two things: whether the fighters would need to be compromised to look as good as the arcade, and whether Sega of Japan approved the release. I'm going to say it was likely that it came down to the latter. While Sega made a habit of ditching several IPs as they moved from one generation to another, I'm convinced that Panzer Dragoon Orta would have seen the series make the transition from Saturn to Dreamcast. Team Andromeda, the original developers of the series, disbanded following the completion of Panzer Dragoon Saga, with Orta being developed by Smilebit. Several former Team Andromeda staff returned to work on Orta though, including Takashi Iwade and Kentaro Yoshida, composer Saru Kobayashi, and battle designer Akihiko Mukiyama, who directed the game. The story picks up after the events of Panzer Dragoon Saga, with the Empire having rebuilt itself following the destruction of the towers, and the game returns to its on-rails roots. As with the first two Panzer Dragoon games, you take down waves of enemies using your on-screen reticle to utilise lock-on lasers, with the camera being rotated to view threats from all sides. In an interview with Famitsu's Xbox magazine in July of 2001, director Akihiko Mukiyama and producer Takayuki Kawagoe went into detail about not just the series itself, but a potential Dreamcast release for Orta. In the interview, titled "The People Who Made the Dragon Fly Again," Mukiyama says, "To be honest, it would have been nice to release it on the Dreamcast, but the time wasn't right. Also, the image of the previous trilogy was so strong that I think it would have been difficult to make it on Dreamcast, but with the specs of the Xbox, we thought we could overcome that hurdle, and that was one of the main reasons we started production." Takayuki Kawagoe goes on to reveal that different genres were considered before settling on a 3D on-rail shooter. "I thought about what genre would be best," he says. "I'm making a new Panzer in this century. It's like a turning point. In the end, I thought a 3D shooter was the best way to make the most of the power of the Xbox machine." In regards to Orta's link to the previous trilogy, Mukiyama goes on to say, "Basically the worlds are connected, but the big story is over. Orta depicts the world after that. It takes place over a period of several decades." It seems that the decision to bring Panzer Dragoon Orta to Xbox is a result of circumstance rather than technical limitations. Had Dreamcast remained on the market beyond 2001, I think there's every chance that Mukiyama brings his game to Sega hardware. It may not have gone on to look as spectacular as the Xbox version, but the Dreamcast would have more than delivered. Jet Set Radio is undoubtedly one of the Dreamcast's most original and impressive games. With cutting-edge, cel-shaded visuals, a crazy story and deep gameplay mechanics, a sequel was a certainty. Just sadly not on Dreamcast. Released in 2002, Jet Set Radio Future was more than just a sequel. It was a reimagining, taking the rebellious spirit of the original game and turning it into something bigger, faster, leaner and more ambitious. Set in a futuristic version of Tokyo, you once again play as the GGs, battling rival crews and dodging local law enforcement, who are hell-bent on ending your graffiti tagging antics once and for all. The gameplay in Jet Set Radio Future is slicker, the controls are more fluid and the cel-shaded art style even more stylish and vibrant than before. Smilebit didn't just build on Jet Set Radio's foundations, they redefined them. Stages in the game are larger and are now interconnected, and often featuring multiple objectives. These range from mimicking a rival's tricks and route through a stage, or beating another skater in a race. The police, who previously chased after the player in the last game, now appear in specific areas, with the player tasked with stopping them by boosting into them head first, knocking them over and tagging them to render them immobile. Each area has hidden items to collect, including graffiti souls, which unlock new graffiti designs, and mystery tapes, which unlock new street challenges where more graffiti souls can be earned. Both critics and fans loved Jet Set Radio Future, making it one of the cult classic titles on the Xbox. even if it never quite found the mass market success it deserved, just like the first game. It launched alongside the console in Japan and Europe and eventually ended up bundled with Xbox systems alongside Sega GT 2002, which for many players was their very first taste of Sega in the post-Dreamcast era. The soundtrack though is incredible, but for me it's not quite as iconic or memorable as the first games. Hideki Naganuma returns, accompanied by Richard Jacques, and while the gameplay is more streamlined with the simplification of the tagging mechanic, I feel the removal of the analog stick movements when performing those tags makes Jet Set Radio Future a shallower gameplay experience. Jet Set Radio will return in due course though, thanks to the New Era, New Energy announcement in late 2023. Proof that, even after all these years, the streets of Tokyo still understand the concept of love. It may be called Project Gotham Racing, but to every Dreamcast owner who migrated to Xbox, this game will forever and always be Metropolis Street Racer 2. Created by Liverpool-based Bizarre Creations, MSR was the best racing game on Dreamcast bar none. With real-life locations painstakingly recreated via multiple visits and thousands of photos, it brought a level of visual realism never before seen in a console racing game. The secret of MSR's success though was the kudos system, a devilish, addictive risk versus reward gambling mechanic that made players race on the edge in order to succeed and progress. As the game says, it's not how fast you drive, it's how you drive fast. Project Gotham Racing on first boot up feels like a supercharged version of MSR. Dreamcast MSR players are made to feel right at home as soon as that main menu comes on screen, which even uses the same fonts and the kudos system. In terms of locations, Project Gotham features the same trio of London, San Francisco and Tokyo, but adds New York to the roster. Again, painstakingly recreated from location visits and images. In total, the game features 204 unique circuits. Project Gotham Racing features 4 main game modes: Quick Race, Arcade Race, Time Attack and Kudos Challenge, the latter replacing the Street Racing mode in MSR. Just like in MSR, you take part in one-on-one races, street races and hot laps, with Project Gotham introducing the brand new style challenges, which seasoned players will know is where the infuriating but addictive cone challenges can be found. Had the Dreamcast remained a viable platform, I've got no doubt that Bizarre Creations would have given MSR a sequel. Sadly, the studio was closed down in 2011 by Activision, who had bought them only 4 years earlier. Their presence in both the UK game development scene and the racing genre as a whole remains sorely missed. There are many who will scoff at this suggestion, but in the comments section of our recent OutRun 2 SP video, it seems there's just as many of you who agree with me that OutRun 2 should have come to the Dreamcast. While the Sega Chihiro board was based on OG Xbox technology, there's nothing to suggest the Dreamcast couldn't have done OutRun 2 in some form. Would it have looked as good as the OG Xbox version? Probably not. Would it have been closer to the PS2 version of OutRun 2 SP or Coast to Coast? Most likely. I mean, come on, if the PlayStation Portable could give us a decent version of OutRun 2 Coast to Coast, there is no reason the Dreamcast couldn't. Sega had already shown that they could produce a high-end 3D arcade racing game in the form of Daytona USA 2001. With huge detailed graphics and a rock-solid 60 FPS frame rate, it may not have been Daytona USA 2 quality, but it was damn close. It's a shame that OutRun's long-awaited return missed Sega's hardware entirely, because the return of such an iconic franchise deserved to be played on a Sega console. While many see Sonic Heroes as the spiritual successor to Sonic Adventure 2, they're entirely different games. Takashi Iizuka, producer of Sonic Adventure 2, wanted to make a new Sonic game, but didn't want to continue the Adventure franchise, as he believed it only appealed to hardcore Sonic fans. he wanted to make a game that even the most casual players could enjoy, harking back to the simplicity and the pick up and play nature of the Mega Drive games. The result is Sonic Heroes. The GameCube and Xbox versions of Sonic Heroes run at 60 FPS, whereas the PS2 version runs at half of that. According to Noah Musler, product manager for Sonic Heroes, running the PS2 version at 60 frames per second would have resulted in significant slowdown or an inconsistent frame rate. That said, Musler insisted that if you only have a PS2, you're still going to get a pretty great game. So it stands to reason then that the Dreamcast version would have also likely run at 30 FPS, but that wouldn't have been enough to deter Sonic's most hardcore fans, who had stayed faithful to the Dreamcast into its later years. In going back to the more linear stage layout of Sonic games of old, Sonic Heroes feels more like a Sonic game than either of the Sonic Adventure games, mainly due to the lack of exploration. Reviewers agreed, calling it the best 3D Sonic game yet, but commenting that it still didn't match the fun of the 2D Mega Drive originals. There were so many Sega or Dreamcast related games on the original Xbox. Here are just some more honourable mentions.
Fight!
We'll never know just how much power developers could have squeezed from Dreamcast during years 3, 4 and 5 had it lived on that long, but it's fun to imagine what could have been. What games do you think were certainties for a Dreamcast release had it not been discontinued? Let us know in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching. This has been James the SEGAHolic of the Sega Guys, and until next time, we'll see you on the Sega side.